Everybody, I hope we had a good lunch. I'm in a standby mode, so let's hope we can keep it interactive and ensure that we kind of gain from this session. So I'll keep this thing about 20 minutes and then we can have some questions for 5 minutes after that. So just as a brief introduction, I work for a bank, but I'm not here to give any financial advice. I'm not here to sell you anything, so I'm just going to share a story about what the NAB is doing in the space of cloud computing. I'll speak a bit about my role at NAB, my day job, and share some experiences about cloud adoption in a bank in Australia. So very briefly, we'll speak a bit about how banking has changed in Australia over the last 20 odd years. Again, fast forward mode, not a big history of it. We'll speak a bit about what NAB is doing to transform itself as a bank, as a company, to deal with cloud computing and customer challenges. We'll then share a bit of a story about the kind of risks that we see are inherent in cloud computing adoption and how do we manage that risk of cloud computing based on risk management strategy. And then a bit of a conclusion about what we see are the key insights that are important for cloud adoption. Very briefly about the NAB. So NAB is one of the large 4 banks in Australia. It's got over 12 million customers. It's got presence in also Singapore, Hong Kong, Asia, Japan, the UK and the US. And it's a very customer-centric organization that puts the customer at the heart of everything that the bank does. So our philosophy is do the right thing for the customer. NAB is also implementing a private cloud right now. And it's one of the key initiatives that is quite important for us to get it right from our perspective. And we also use cloud in the public and hybrid space where it makes sense. So kind of we are a strong user of technologies and cloud computing where it makes sense for us from a risk and a reward perspective. Very briefly, my role in the NAB is I'm a technology risk partner for the NAB. So my role is to actually advise the businesses on the risk and the rewards of cloud computing, provide them the right information, the right kind of data points that help them make decisions about risk management for cloud computing. In a bank, risk management is quite important, and we invest a lot in ensuring that we understand the risks of cloud computing and other changes to our systems from a risk and reward perspective. So enough about this specific slide. I do have a second day job. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with a second salary, but my second day job is I chair the regulation working group of a consortium called the Open Data Center Alliance. We'll speak a bit more about it in the next few slides. And I'm a member of the Technical Coordination Committee of the Open Data Center Alliance. So again, sometimes this is my second day job. Sometimes the day is quite long because we all kind of fit it in within one long day. So if you look at banking in the last 20 years, what we have seen is that maybe in the 80s and 90s, if you do want to go to meet your branch manager, you might have to wear a suit, take an appointment, and kind of go to the branch. You would write checks. You could actually, we bought a credit card, but use a click-clack machine to actually kind of use credit facilities. And that's what banking was in the 80s. In fact, in some of the banks before, you actually needed to even take permission from the bank if you wanted to get married, for example. So in Australia, banking was quite different. Now what we see is that the customers are really switched on. They are all 24/7 connected to banking systems. They want the banks to remain open 24/7, not just internet banking, but also they want the branches to remain open on the weekends, long hours, and etc. So I think the customer behavior is quite different. And what we do find in the NAB is that customers use our banking on mobile devices a lot more than from traditional things like laptops and computers. So more than 50% of our logins on internet banking comes from mobile devices, and it's quite a trend that we follow very, very closely. Customers also expect payments to happen in real time, so gone are the days where you don't get a money for the next 3 days when you actually transfer funds from a merchant to other merchant. And at the same time, a lot of the banks in Australia are suffering from legacy systems that really can't keep up with what the needs of the customers are. So we do see that banks are investing a lot in moving from a legacy environment to state-of-the-art systems to actually deal with these customer challenges and actually face the realities of competition. IT skills in Australia are also quite getting scarce, so I think that's another trend that we do follow quite closely. And at the same time, information security remains a strong challenge. It's a constant battle that banks face to ensure that we are on top of security management kind of challenges. And at the same time, with a lot of data being generated online, I think half of the world's data was generated in the last 2 years, for example. So I think there's a lot of benefits of leveraging big data to understand customer behavior and serve them better. So using this as a backdrop, what do we see as the key challenges? We're seeing that the customers are actually driving us to do better from a banking perspective. So they're driving the agenda. They help shape how they want to deal with us. So they want to kind of deal with us with multiple channels. They want to deal with us when they feel like. And therefore, we listen to quite a lot to our customers to ensure that they help us set the agenda. So the next few slides, I'll share a bit about the technology transformation that NAB is going through, which is like a 10-year program to ensure that we can transform our key components within the NAB to actually service this specific agenda. Also, competition is quite intense, so it's not just banks, but non-banks compete in the financial marketplace, and if we don't reinvent ourselves, we perhaps would be quite historical, so we don't want to do that. So let me speak a bit about the 10-year transformation program that NAB is undertaken. This is kind of year 3 of the journey. We are going very well, so let me just give you a brief history about where it is. Now, all this is not cloud computing, but this has got a lot of things that are quite similar and relevant to cloud computing as a service-based model that we are going to be implementing in this kind of a space. So as we said, our customers want a different experience. They want to deal with us in a safe and better fashion. Our staff want to ensure that their systems are not really quite old. And at the same time, we want to ensure that we are responsible for the environment and we are sustainable. So for example, in Australia, we don't have a space problem, but we have a power problem. So we want to ensure that our IT systems don't consume so much power that we actually become quite bad for the planet. So in 2010, NAB became the first bank in Australia to become carbon neutral. And now NAB is actually beyond carbon neutral. So we take our environment quite seriously from our responsibility perspective. At the same time, if we do kind of transform, we want to ensure that our operational risk of managing old systems also gets reduced. So we want to ensure that our transformation satisfies not just getting more business, but also managing the risk of our operations in the bank. So in that context, we have about 4 things that I'll cover today. Mainly, what are we doing with our infrastructure as a large component of work? What are we doing with our networks? What are we doing with our data center? And what are we doing with our applications to ensure that we actually service our customers in a better fashion? So very briefly, we used to manage our own infrastructure. We have now got IBM to manage our infrastructure. So it's a large outsourcing deal where IBM will look after and manage our infrastructure for the next couple of years. We used to actually ask for servers. When we have a project, we actually ask for a server. Now we're going to ask for resource units and virtualization. So the whole game is changing from actually asking for physical resources to virtual resources. And the kind of default state is that when we do implement changes to our systems, we only ask for resources, not servers and not the infrastructure. So as we heard in the morning, infrastructure is a new code, for example, for us too. We do have 2 data centers that have served us quite okay for the past couple of decades, but one of them is not really modern. So we are building a 3rd data center in Melbourne, which is a tier 3 data center. And the kind of key focus out there is efficiency, simplification, and again, high density virtualization. So from that perspective, the internal private cloud of the NAB is focused on infrastructure and data centers that ensures that we can actually use them quite effectively to manage our needs of the future. We did have kind of 30 small computer rooms in Australia because we bought a lot of businesses over the past few years. So the kind of key of this program is also ensure that we decommission a lot of those old computer rooms, centralize it to one data center, and use that as a modern data center that implements virtualization and service-based models from our perspective. We did have multiple networks also. So in this case, we have outsourced our network management to Telstra in Australia, and we have converged our networks to one large network, which is kind of quite good. Therefore, we don't again now ask for bits and pieces. We ask for a service, and then Telstra provisions us the kind of required components to manage that service. So the way we kind of ask for our IT, the language has changed. We don't ask for physical devices. We actually ask for services from our providers, and we actually get services that we consume. And finally, from an application perspective, we do kind of face the challenges of legacy systems. So we are working with Oracle to transform our core banking systems. Again, a large deal where we're going to use Oracle core banking for our applications and decommission a lot of our old applications that we've been using for the last 30 to 40 years. In fact, some kind of programmers are actually playing golf now because they were the ones that built those systems back in 1970 something, for example. So again, in the application space, we leverage our partners to ensure that we get benefits of the R&D that the partners provide. So for example, Oracle spends $8 billion a year on R&D on banking and other applications. So we definitely want to leverage that R&D rather than spend our time doing an R&D on things that the partners can do for us. So that's the kind of journey that we are on. So let me talk about the challenges that we face as a bank to implement service-based architecture and cloud computing. Now, some of this is not new. We kind of heard about this since yesterday and today. Dave spoke about the challenges of we have many standards or no standards for cloud computing. Sometimes there is not a kind of a good match between business needs and the regulatory requirements and what cloud could provide. For example, also while the cloud is quite good to kind of set up, sometimes the internal processes in organizations are very slow. So if you want to buy something, buying something might take forever, and your business case could actually get destroyed because you took a long time to buy those kind of services. And finally, the expertise and culture required to manage cloud computing is perhaps a bit different from the kind of technology state. So for example, we don't kind of want to deal with bits and bytes. We want to deal with service management, vendor management, different skills that are really important to manage cloud arrangements in a better fashion. So what are the kind of things that keep us awake, sometimes keeps me awake also from a cloud computing perspective, being a risk partner for technology? Once we speak a bit about the kind of top 3 things which are a good sales pitch for cloud computing, you can do things faster, you can fail faster, you can get efficiencies in different ways. There's a lot of things under the water that we need to get completely right to ensure that we can actually balance the risk and the rewards of cloud computing. So yesterday Dave spoke about, in the keynote session, about privacy issues. Dave spoke about compliance. He spoke about multi-tenancy, for example. He spoke a bit about data sovereignty and security. This is a CSA conference, so I'm sure we've spoken a lot about these kind of things that are quite important. So what I'm going to share is 2 things that NAB has done to ensure that we understand these challenges quite well, and we actually lead the industry in ensuring that we can create the right foundations for us to use cloud computing to help our customers. These are not the only challenges, but these are some of them that kind of seem top of mind for quite a few companies that would use cloud computing. So now we get into a bit of a solution mode. We spoke about NAB's transformation, 10-year program across 4 components. We spoke about some challenges. Now let's speak about how are we balancing the rewards of cloud computing with risk management. So actually we do 3 things. We actually look out from our perspective, and we actually work with the industry to develop requirements across the different customers of cloud computing. So I'll speak a bit about our work with the ODCA, the Open Data Center Alliance, and how do we ensure that we gain and benefit from that collaboration. There's actually a customer-based, customer-led collaboration across the industry. Then I'll share a bit about what's happening inside the bank, which is how do we ensure that our governance frameworks, our risk management policies, our risk strategy, our outsourcing strategy is actually meeting the requirements of balancing risk and rewards of cloud computing. And finally, I'll speak a bit about how do we ensure that we standardize on some of the good practices that we have developed across the industry to ensure that cloud can be used not just by NAB or other organizations, but it could be a thing that could benefit the kind of social infrastructure of the planet, for example. So in this brief picture, we kind of see that the key stakeholders that we have for cloud computing, we kind of look inside. We are an adopter of cloud computing. We need to worry about our customers and ensure that we meet the needs of our customers. We consider the regulators as a key stakeholder because we actually deal with the country and the regulations of where we are, and we are a global company also, so we want to ensure that we manage that quite well. We also worry about industry partners to ensure that we are able to be flexible and open with cloud computing, and we want to deal with cloud service providers to ensure that it's not a squeeze game, but we ensure that we can actually ensure a fair amount of collaboration with our partners. So very briefly, we speak a bit about how we are taking industry leadership in the NAB to work with industry. So as I spoke, my second day job was being part of the ODCA, the Open Data Center Alliance. The ODCA is actually an independent company or an organization of 300 large organizations that have come together to build open standards for cloud computing. So if you just look at this chart out here, it's kind of, you may find that there are a lot of large customers that have formed a steering committee of this group. These companies spend about $100 billion a year on IT. So I think the voice of the customer is fairly strong because there's a lot of spending in IT. And whilst it's a customer-led organization, the ODCA is actually also working with contributor members that are service providers like Atos, for example, Splunk, DHL, Nokia, etc., and solution providers like Cisco, HP, Microsoft of the world to ensure that the requirements that we build for cloud computing, which help cloud adoption in a more open fashion, can actually be used by service providers and the solution providers to build an ecosystem that can be used to further cloud computing in a more sustainable fashion. So what we do find is that as NAB, this is a very large problem to solve. Dave said yesterday, we need to work together because the kind of hackers are working together. It will be foolish for us to not work together. So again, in that similar light, we want to work together with other customers of cloud computing to develop requirements and standards that help cloud adoption in a more sustainable fashion. I can spend a lot of time about this, but I don't want to kind of spend more time about the ODCA out here. But what really happens with the ODCA is we kind of work with different working groups. For example, so we have a working group on regulation, we have a working group on security, infrastructure, data management, and services. And we kind of build requirements that are common for customers for cloud computing. We publish them on the websites, and then they can be used by you and I and everybody to ensure that we actually deal with the right problems that are common across different verticals and different industries from that perspective. So I share the regulation working group with other folks over the world, but my colleagues chair the security working group and the big data working group in the NAB. And we invested a lot of our time and kind of energy to ensure that we work with the industry and other kind of customers to ensure that we can understand this problem better and we can build thought leadership that can be used to solve that problem in a more sustainable fashion. So enough about ODCA. Let me speak a bit more about my day job, which actually pays me the salary to come to work every day. So my day job is risk management for technology in the bank. And what we do in the bank is we actually have a sourcing strategy. And that strategy tells us why should we do outsourcing, for example. What are the functions that we need to outsource and the reasons for those outsourcing functions. So we actually build a board-approved strategy that guides the whole of the bank in ensuring that we can understand which functions and services are applicable to be outsourced and where we should use cloud from. We then set a risk appetite. The risk appetite is actually how much risk are we willing to take as a bank to actually use these services. So this actually a matter about are we very hungry to actually take a lot more risk, are we conservative, or are we somewhere in the middle? And if the appetite is set at a certain level, what controls do we expect to be put by our business and the cloud providers to ensure that we can manage that risk in a really, really strong fashion? Now, my experience with the risk appetite is that this is something which our regulators found very favorable from their perspective because we have now set some rules and guidelines that we use internally for cloud computing. And all our decisions that we take are based on the risk appetite. And we ensure that we don't go outside the appetite that has been set by the board. Now, it's good to have strategy and appetite, but unless you incorporate that within day-to-day thinking, the bank really will not work well. So what we've done is we have actually incorporated the regulatory requirements, the strategy and the risk appetite into our procurement policies, procurement frameworks, and the way we buy things in the bank. So we've been buying things for a lot of years. We buy labor, we buy pencils, we buy IT and everything. So we now have one framework that incorporates cloud computing guidelines as a part of that one framework that we use. And we educate our staff to ensure that that framework can be understood by the different people, and people can make the right decisions by ensuring that they're accountable for their decisions and they can make the right kind of choices. And finally, we speak about sourcing governance. So once we actually get into the cloud, our challenges start at that point of time. They don't end. So we then ensure that we actually govern the cloud services using governance of our vendors, of our service levels, our risk management from their perspective on an ongoing basis. How much time do I have? 1 more minute? Cool. So speaking about, once we speak about the frameworks, an important part of cloud computing is the people. And what we find is that if we don't control the kind of people frameworks, we actually are not going to succeed. You may have cloud sprawl where people may just buy cloud without doing what it is. So we spend a lot of time and money and energy in educating our staff in cloud computing and ensuring that we help people make the right decisions that are good for the bank and good for the customer. So again, trust and education of our business is quite important, and we take that thing as a very serious kind of a philosophy for the bank. Very briefly, the ODC also works very closely with the CSA, DMTF, Green Grid, other standards bodies to ensure that it's not just requirements, the requirements get translated into standards. And we then work with large solution providers like Cisco, HP, to ensure that solutions meet those requirements and standards too. So it's an ecosystem that helps further cloud computing in a more open and interoperable fashion. So in conclusion, what we find is that if we do balanced risk management, we can actually transform yesterday's challenges into enablers for tomorrow. And the time that we spend doing bits and bytes, the kind of low value work, we ought to spend the time to actually do stuff that really differentiates us competitively from other banks and other kind of organizations. And it's kind of similar to Lonely Planet, where we ought to spend our time doing things that really add value to our customers and use the cloud for what it is from our perspective. And finally, here are my contact details. Any questions about the NAB or the ODCA, or even if you want to kind of join the ODCA, feel free to do so. Just drop your line, and thank you for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Pankaj. We have time for one quick question.
Hello. Thanks for an interesting talk. I just had a quick question. Obviously, you've managed to bring a lot of elasticity into your virtual environments. How do you control? You mentioned the sprawl. How do you control that sprawl, and more importantly, the cost of that sprawl? Are you able to build back individual cost centers or departments or something like that?
I think the cloud sprawl aspect is quite important to control, because sometimes when you buy a cloud service for one reason, and then the contract really expands to using other services. So what we do in the NAB is we have one service provider manager that governs our relationship with their vendor. And that person is accountable to ensure that that service is not expanded beyond the reasons that we don't want it to be. At the same time, we make people accountable for their decisions. So whilst we can't police everything in the world, accountability is quite a strong message in the bank. And we ensure that our procurement processes are also quite well controlled to ensure that we just can't use a credit card and buy a cloud service that could sound quite innocent in one space, but then kind of become quite dangerous. So again, we have to educate our staff. We need to ensure that we understand the risk and the rewards. And if you do find that issues become quite large, then you make one person accountable for service management for a specific cloud service provider.
Thank you, Pankaj. I think the insights you shared with us during your presentation very useful, and really showing how cloud computing is integrated as part of your whole sourcing strategy. So thanks very much for that, Pankaj.
Thanks, guys.